Hello people, and this time we're going to talk about the Commodore Amiga. We're going retro this time, and we're going to talk about Andy Warhol's forgotten Commodore Amiga artwork uncovered. You know, for a long time there's a debate about artwork in video games. I think, to me, the older video game companies, or video game covers of video games, are much more art than a lot of today's, because today's, maybe it's me because I like stuff more hand-drawn than computer-drawn, but there is a place for both. Some computer covers can look amazing. But the recent archival of some long-lost digital artworks created by Andy Warhol on a Commodore Amiga have proven that there are a link between two creative worlds. Now, one of the things that I think people make a mistake of is someone's a creative person, just because they do like draw doesn't mean necessarily, or art or whatever, doesn't mean necessarily that their creative stops when they're not doing like art. Like paintings, a lot of people creative will be creative beyond just that. And in this case, he apparently did some stuff with the Commodore Amiga. As a recent digital artist stumbled upon a clip of YouTube showing Warhol's most recent Commodore iconic computer, while the footage of Warhol seems to be fairly accessible to all, the curious artist who was watching this clip raised the question: where exactly are the Amiga artworks that are talked about? Following some research, obviously, the curators at Carnegie Museum of Art and Warhol's museum chief archivist, a collection of floppy disks were located and set aside for archiving. So these were on a floppy disk. These were set aside just to be archived. The nearby Carnegie Mellon University Computer Club soon stepped in to provide original hardware to help with the archival of it, and Warhol's efforts on one of the most favorite classic computers. They call this article, they call it classic computers, but really, the Amiga was a computer that, depending on where you lived, you played it or not, right? Over here in the States, the Amiga, more known for Toaster Club stuff than actually like gaming. Like, Amiga wasn't necessarily the end-all be-all of gaming like the Commodore 64 was over here. Don't get me wrong, it did well. It just didn't have as big of a following. But the images are kind of somewhat of a mixed bag in a sense, featuring like MS Paint kind of style art. You know, because you're talking the Amiga, you're not talking current day computers here. You know, like for example, renditions of the famous Cable Soup. Also, Mutate the Birth of Venus. Unusual self-portrait of him. But it is great to see something that brings attention back to the computer, and to show that, you know what, there are people sometimes think, oh, that person would never use a computer, then you find out they do. And it is cool that a lot of efforts were made to save this artwork off the disc, because, to be honest, disc is a format that it's not very good at lasting long term, from keeping the data being corrupted. And it is cool that they went out of their way to save this data for future generations. Whether it is still important history for Andy Warhol, his history is important as a famous icon that he was, and it's a bullet point for the Commodore Amiga and Amiga fans that, hey, you know, Andy Warhol, you know, he made some art of his on the Amiga. Whether he was just playing around or just being creative, who knows? But it is cool that it was made. So, what do you think about Andy Warhol actually doing some pictures on the Amiga, messing around with it? What do you think about all the effort made to save this, for a museum to save this and keep this for future generations? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions like always, and I'll talk to you guys later.